I'm going to take you on a journey tonight. We're going to go on a journey through your gastrointestinal tract. So tonight it's all about you. I'm going to take you on this journey because I find it's a journey that many people are ignorant on. And I love the proverb. It's called Proverbs. It's Proverbs 14 verse 6 that says, "Knowledge is easy to him that understands." When you understand how the gut works, then you have the knowledge on how to treat it. So we're going to begin with the mouth. And the mouth is the only place we have say over. We have say over what goes in. We have say over when it goes in, whether it goes in every hour or twice a day. We have say over how long it's actually in the mouth. And the mouth is the only part of the body where we have exposed bone. And you know that's what your teeth are. They're exposed bone. And the teeth have a role, and that is to chew the food. So it's good at the table to pretend to be steam engines. Chew, 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 chew. Because there's no other place in the whole of the gastrointestinal tract where the food is chewed. So if it's not chewed properly here, it's not going to be chewed properly anywhere. So it's very important that you chew very, very well. It's a good idea to count, maybe count to 30. You might have heard the old saying that we should drink our food and chew our drinks. Have you heard that saying? So when you get cold water, it's good to chew it around a bit, warm it up a little bit. It's much kinder to your stomach. And so when you eat, you should chew your food till it's just about a liquid, a nice cream. It's like those little nuts. Any little portion of nut that doesn't get chewed up, guess what? It comes out the same. And so you're not able to access all the nutrients out of that. And as you will see as we go down the gastrointestinal tract, what happens in the mouth affects the rest of the body. So we have say over what goes in. We have say over when it goes in. We have say over how long it's in the mouth. We have say over how often it goes in. We have say over the environment surrounding entry. So we should eat really only in a relaxed environment. I loved a saying that I read in an old book where the author said, we should cast off care and anxious thought when we sit to dine. That's why if ever I had a child or even a baby who made a fuss at the table, I quickly removed them very quickly, out onto the veranda or into another room. And when you only feed them twice a day, they want to be at that table. And when a child is putting on a turn at the table, it can interfere a little bit with digestion. And so that's what we have say over, is the mouth. Now, digestion does begin in the mouth. So we're looking at the mouth. So these titles are organ, pH, enzyme, and food. So let's look at the mouth. It has an alkaline pH. And the enzymes that are released in the mouth for digestion, one is lingual lipase. Sounds like a very long name. Lingual lipase is always the enzyme that breaks down fat. But the sublingual glands just under the tongue, they release lingual lipase. And lingual lipase only breaks down saturated fat. So saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown happens in the mouth. No other fat, it's like that. So what are saturated fats? Saturated fats are coconut, get saturated fats. There's quite a bit in the macadamia nuts. And there are other nuts that have a little bit of saturated fat in them. Also coconut, yes, every coconut oil, butter, cream, milk. Also butter, shea butter and palm oil, they're all your saturated fats. Their breakdown is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. The other enzyme that's released is ptyalin. Ptyalin is a salivary amylase, and ptyalin breaks down starch. So your starches are all your carbohydrates. So their breakdown begins in the mouth. But the human mouth does not have ptyalin in it until the baby's molars are through. So when a baby is born, the salivary amylase isn't made. The first teeth that a baby gets is 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they're called milk teeth. And you know why they're called milk teeth? Because that's what babies should be having predominantly, milk. And those teeth, 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, they're tearing teeth, they're not grinding teeth. But it's also taste time. So I used to look for these 3 signs with my babies before I gave them anything. They could sit, that makes sense, doesn't it? They could actually put the food in their mouth, that makes sense. You know, there's been a death and no one attended the funeral because no one knew he'd died. It was the death of common sense. It never made sense to me that to mash up all this food while the baby's lying on their back and shovel it into their mouth, and you notice what happens? It comes straight back out. And my friends used to say, just scoop it up and put it back in. I said, this defies reason. You see, when a baby is sucking at the nipple, the baby uses the tongue and the top lip to suck. So when you put this mashed up food in, the tongue and the top lip come down, and what happens to it? It just pokes straight back out. And I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in lying on my back and being fed slop. So milk teeth, because babies should not be getting food until they can sit, till they can feed themselves, and they have a few teeth. But those first 8 teeth are taste time. I used to give my babies a piece of celery, a piece of cucumber. And the cucumber, you know what you find? And I saw this with my little grandson Lennox. There's bits of cucumbers all around the little tray and all around the floor, and a few bits get in. See, it's just taste time. And you know what the baby learns to do? Chew. And when babies are introduced to slop, just this mashed stuff, you see, they never learn to chew. Now, the next teeth that come through, the molars around here, they're grinders. What do you grind? You grind grain. And when the grinders come through, then the glands in the mouth release the salivary amylase, ptyalin. So no baby should receive any starch until the molars are through. This is a surprise to most people because mothers are told at the age of 4 to 6 months of age to start giving the baby rice cereal. What's rice cereal? Pure starch. I was in Holland about 6 weeks ago, and a couple came up with this beautiful baby, roly-poly baby. They said, our baby is constipated, can't go to the toilet. It's 3 days. I said, how many teeth does the baby have? 1. Does the baby eat food? Yes. What does the baby eat? Oh, cereals and breads and toast. I said, no. The baby cannot digest them. That's why your baby's constipation. They'd never heard of such a thing. Check it out. Go to your anatomy and physiology books. I'm just giving you the basic anatomy and physiology. And did you know that 100 years ago, babies weren't fed food? 200 years ago, 500 years ago, they weren't fed food until they could feed themselves and had teeth to chew. I've had people say to me, Barbara, just get a blender, get a Bay mix. I said, but that defies reason. So I never made baby food. I never made baby food. In fact, at the mealtime, I take a bit off my plate and give it to the little one. It was a bit of celery or a stalk from the hard stalk from the lettuce leaf or the cabbage leaf, and they'd chew happily away for a while. None of my children have any allergies, and I think it's partly because they didn't receive food until their gut was ready to receive it. So let's move on down, and we go through. It's a double-layered valve, and it's called the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac is the heart muscle. It's called the cardiac sphincter because it's very close to the heart muscle. And if you talk to nurses, doctors who work in emergencies, they often get people coming thinking they're having a heart attack, and it's actually reflux because it's in that same area. It's this pain or discomfort. It's called reflux or GERDs or heartburn. You've possibly heard of it. What's the cause? And by the way, what are people given if they have that? Oh, an antacid. But let me show you how this makes no sense at all. So the next organ we're going to look at is the stomach. And the stomach is the only part in the whole body that is acid. And it should be acid, because it's only in an acid environment that the protein can be broken down. So why, especially if there's a double-layered gate there, why would acid come up into the esophagus? We had a guest with an ulcerated esophagus because of the acid coming up. Now that's not just one bit of acid coming up, that's week after week after month after month. So remember, where am I going to put our why? Let's put it here. It's a very, very important word. We should be asking why at every step. So why? Why would someone have heartburn or GERD or reflux? Well, it's the acid is not the problem. I've never met anyone with too much acid in their stomach. If they had too much acid in their stomach, that they would digest their meal in an hour. You see, dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid of humans. They don't get reflux. They don't get heartburn. It's not the acid. The problem is this little valve. Now that little valve sits right in the middle of the diaphragm. Now if you go to the doctor and you've got reflux, will he ask you about the strength of your core muscles? Because if your core muscles are weak, your diaphragm is going to be weak, and that little muscle sitting in the middle of your diaphragm, the cardiac sphincter, is going to be weak. It's a muscle. And when that muscle's like this, when that muscle's relaxed, it's closed. When it tightens, it opens. And it opens when the food starts coming down so that it can go in. But God gave a 2-layered valve there so it won't come up. So to prevent and also to heal from heartburn, we need to... You doing your push-ups every day? Did you do your push-ups this morning? We need to have strong core. We need to have a strong core, strong muscle, that'll have a strong cardiac sphincter. But most people eat too much food at night. We should be eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea, or you call it supper, like a pauper, light. So it's eating a large meal at night. Then the person lays down and gravity causes the contents to push against that cardiac sphincter, weakening it. Stress, worry, anxiety, the muscles tense, the cardiac sphincter tenses, and it opens. So stress can also play a part. So to recover from heartburn or reflux, core strengthening exercises, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, try not to eat at night, and if you do, make it light, and take magnesium. Magnesium is a muscle relaxant, and when that cardiac sphincter is relaxed, it closes. So it's as simple as that. So let's have a look at the stomach. Lining the stomach are big folds, and these folds are lined with gastric glands. And 2/3 of these gastric glands release mucus. And that mucus forms a thick coating over the stomach to protect it from the acids that are going to come from here. So from these glands down here are released hydrochloric acid. Also is released is pepsinogen. And when hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen unite, they release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. Now that union of hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen to produce pepsin, it only happens in a very acid environment. And pepsin will only work in a very acid environment. So if a person hasn't got enough acid in their stomach, they're not going to be digesting properly. In fact, it's 5-6 hours after the meal and they feel like they've just eaten the meal. That's one of the signs of low hydrochloric acid. I have met many people with low hydrochloric acid. So pepsin is the enzyme that begins protein digestion. That's the only food that is broken down in the stomach is protein. Let me tell you something about hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid does not only connect with pepsinogen to produce pepsin. Hydrochloric acid is antifungal, antibacterial. So if we eat, say, a sandwich, let's say we eat a sandwich, someone made us a sandwich, you don't realise that just before they made the sandwich, they patted the dog. Then they made the sandwich. And maybe there are some little nasties on their fingers that went in the sandwich and you ate it and you don't realise it because they're microscopic and you can't see them. If you've got enough hydrochloric acid, it'll kill them. So it's one of our frontline defences. In my book, Self-Heal by Design, I have got a chapter called The Stomach's Secret Weapon, Hydrochloric Acid. So if someone says to me, I've got too much acid, I say, fantastic. But why do you think you've got too much acid? Well, it keeps coming up. Well, the problem's not the acid, the problem's the gate. Well, my stomach's burning. Well, the problem's not the acid. Maybe you're dehydrated because that mucus is 99% water. So often in a dehydrated body, you lack the mucus to protect your stomach lining from the acid. So when people come to me on antacids, maybe from heartburn, I put them on something to boost their hydrochloric acid. Because low hydrochloric acid, the food stays in the stomach, and then it starts to ferment, and then those fumes can come up, so it can be more, the discomfort can be from low hydrochloric acid. Something else is released down here, and that's the intrinsic factor. And the intrinsic factor is required to absorb B12. So let me give you the B12 story, because many people don't know the B12 story. And I'm going to use my fingers. My thumb is B12. And in food, it's bound up with an R protein. And when it gets into the stomach, the hydrochloric acid releases B12 from the R protein. Also in the stomach, intrinsic factor is released. Here's intrinsic factor. The B12 and the intrinsic factor float together all the way down the gastrointestinal tract to the last part of the small intestine, which is the ileum. There, they connect, and because of that connection, then it can be absorbed into the enterohepatic circulation. Hepatic meaning liver. It's a circulatory system that goes round and round and round, and the B12 stays in there until we need it. You can actually have no B12 in your diet for 30 years before you show a deficiency, if you have sufficient intrinsic factor. And B12 is found in organically grown root vegetables. You'll be getting B12 when you pick an apple off a tree and eat it, when you pick a strawberry off the plant and eat it, because B12 is an airborne bacteria. And the reason meat has it is because the cows are eating grass that a few months ago they did droppings on. Yeah, that's how they get it. It's a bacteria. So I find that meat eaters and non-meat eaters alike all can suffer from B12 deficiency, and it's usually because of low hydrochloric acid, low intrinsic factor. So that's the B12 story. If someone is low in hydrochloric acid, they will usually also be low in intrinsic factor, and that's usually more the cause of low B12. Let me tell you a story, and this is a fascinating story. I heard this story, and then I read an article about it, and I found the author's name. So our secretary Googled it, and the book was found for me. It was written in 1840, and it's The Physiology of Digestion by Dr. William Beaumont. This is the story. It was in the very early 1800s that Alexis St. Martin, he was only 18 years of age, he was in a trading store and he sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach. It was an accident. The gun went off and blew part of his stomach away and a few of his ribs. Dr. Beaumont was only 25 at the time, and he was the doctor that assessed him, and he said he would not live. And every day in the hospital he visited him, and he was recovering. What I found interesting is 3 times a big tumour formed, burst, and a 2-inch piece of rib came out. Isn't that interesting? Why did the body form that tumour? To get rid of that piece of rib. It's an amazing body we live in. Alexis St. Martin healed, but he healed with a little hole in his stomach. It was about here. I have pencil drawings of the hole. It's almost like a little mouth with a flap over it. So Dr. Beaumont saw his opportunity, and he'd get a piece of silk thread with a bit of food on it and put it in the hole. An hour later, pull it out, put it back in. 2 hours later, pull it out. 3 hours later, pull it out. And he meticulously documented his findings. So let me show you what he found. And of course, this is the early 1800s and has been confirmed with much research since. He found that there were 5 occurrences that caused the food still to be in the stomach 8 hours later. What Dr. Beaumont found was that digestion took 3.5 to 4 hours. That's on a balanced meal. That's your fibres, your proteins, your fats. Digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours. And then the stomach loves a rest of at least 1 hour. I was talking to a lady today from Mexico. I've been helping her because she's got major gut problems. And she said, I'm hungry after 2 hours. And I said, well, the food would still be in the stomach. I said, have you tried water? Because often the body doesn't know the difference between hunger and thirst. And we have a little valve at the bottom of our stomach called the pyloric sphincter. And Dr. Beaumont found that there seems to be sensors. And when they sense that the food is broken down to a certain stage, then it will open and little by little let the food through. But by the way, the nutrients from the food we eat is not absorbed in the stomach. It is absorbed down here. So when the children say after 2 hours after the meal, I'm starving, what you can say is, must be one of the body's many cries for water. That's what I usually say. Try water. My son, when he was 15, came to me one day and he said, Mum, the water's not doing it anymore. I looked at the clock and I said, great, it's lunchtime. And that's what you'll find when the water's not doing it anymore, then it's lunchtime. So what are the 5 things that caused some of the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later? If ever he overate, Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that there's only so many digestive juices released. So when too much food is put in there, it has a hard time breaking it all down. If he often ate, now most of the time, he ate 5 hours apart, but sometimes he'd have something between. And what Dr. Beaumont found was that the food was still, not all of the food, some of it's through, but if he ate with nothing between, the stomach was empty within 4 hours. But he would have that same food, but he'd have even a biscuit and a cup of tea, or you call it cookie, yeah? We in Australia, we drive in America and we see a sign, biscuits and gravy, we can't understand that because that to us that'd be like cookies and gravy. These Americans, they eat strange food. So we call your cookie, we call that a biscuit. But I know here your biscuits are like a roll, I think. So if he ate every few hours, by the end of the day, some of the breakfast was still in the stomach. If he ate large fluid with a meal, we should stop drinking half an hour before the meal and resume about an hour and a half after the meal. That will not interfere with digestion. If we eat a lot of fluid or drink a lot of fluid with the meal, it waters down that pH, and we need that acid pH. So digestion stops, the body takes the water out, and then resumes back digestion. If you sit to your meal well hydrated, you will not need to drink with your meals. If someone's thirsty after a meal, I say, by all means have a mouthful or two, but try not to have a lot. But before the next meal, try and drink your water between. And if you leave 5 to 6 hours between the meal, you've got plenty of time to drink water. If he was stressed, if he was getting annoyed with Dr. Beaumont putting this string in and out of his stomach. But what Dr. Beaumont found was the only time he really got stressed is if he had alcohol the night before. He said if ever he had alcohol, that slowed digestion right down. If he was anxious or stressed, that also slowed digestion right down. And when you look at that, no wonder so many Americans have gut problems. When you look at the way many eat. So now we come past the pyloric sphincter and into the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. Now before we move on, let me show you how you can boost hydrochloric acid. You can take the juice of a lemon just before a meal. That'll boost hydrochloric acid. You can take a little, even third of a cup of hot, say peppermint tea or bitter tea just before the meal. That will boost. A quarter of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper in about a third of a cup of water just before the meal. That will boost hydrochloric acid. Cayenne pepper will wake anything up. Did you try that cayenne pepper tonight? I just about blew the top of my head off. That's hot stuff. Real hot. In the duodenum, we've got quite a bit happening. You see in the duodenum, we've got there's the liver, and underneath the liver is the gallbladder. And the bile duct comes down from the gallbladder and it connects with the neck of the pancreas and it releases bile. So let's begin by first looking at the liver. The gallbladder is a reservoir for bile. So if someone has had their gallbladder removed, they still make bile because it's the liver that makes the bile. The duodenum is an alkaline environment. And the pancreas here, it releases sodium bicarbonate to quickly bring that back to alkalinity because the food's coming out of the stomach is mixed with acid. So the liver releases bile. And bile is the enzyme that breaks down polyunsaturated fats. In our next lecture, we're going to define fats. So there's really all your nuts and seeds are high in polyunsaturated fats. Whereas your saturated fats, remember, their breakdown begins in the mouth. What we've also got is the pancreas. And the pancreas is also releasing some enzymes into the duodenum. So the pancreas, it releases pancreatic lipase. Now remember lipase? Lipase is the enzyme that breaks down fat. The pancreatic lipase further breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. So the bile emulsifies the fats into tiny particles, and then the pancreatic lipase comes along and further breaks it down so it can be absorbed. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember, in the mouth, the salivary amylase is ptyalin, and the starch began its breakdown in the mouth. But when it got to the stomach, in that acid environment, it was put on hold. And now we're in the duodenum, and the pancreatic amylase finalizes starch digestion. The pancreas also releases trypsin. And trypsin finalizes protein digestion. Remember where protein digestion began? It began in the stomach under pepsin. The pancreas also releases chymotrypsin. Chymotrypsin is another enzyme that helps with protein digestion. I've got some good news, it's not going to get any more difficult. Considering this, students, which organ is the main organ of digestion? Is it the stomach? No. It's the pancreas. I always thought all digestion happens in the stomach. And so when I was reading in my Anatomy and Physiology's book this, I thought, this is fascinating. And I think we all should know something about the house we live in, yeah? Have you noticed if someone has pancreatic cancer, they die very quickly? And the reason they do die so quickly is because they die from malnutrition. Because they're unable to finalise the digestion of their nutrients. And our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube. And anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny substances, absorbed into the blood, then it becomes part of you or me. And that's why digestion is such an important subject. You can be eating the best food, the best organic food, prepared in the best way, but if your gut's not breaking it down properly, you cannot access it. All our food, all our nutrients is absorbed before it's halfway down the small intestine. So all that's happening past that is your insoluble fibre. And our fruits and vegetables, in fact most plant foods are high in insoluble fibre. And we'll see that that's important as we go on. But now we come to the grand finale of digestion. We come to the momentous place where the nutrients are actually absorbed into the blood. The Bible says in Leviticus 17:11 that the life of the flesh is in the blood. And the life of the flesh in the blood, what does that mean? That's where our nutrients are. So you see, all of this food going down the gut, it doesn't get into our blood till it gets broken down efficiently and effectively by the process I've shown you, then it can get absorbed into our blood. Lining the small intestine are villi that look like this. And up the middle of the villi is a lacteal, that's part of our lymphatic system. And all through the villi is our blood capillaries. This is the blood that we want those nutrients to get into. When we were in our mother's womb, our gut was sterile, no bacteria. When we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. A woman's milk does not come in for 3 days after she gives birth, but what's in the breast in those first 3 days is a thick, creamy substance called colostrum. And that colostrum is also rich in Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium. They're the two permanent bacterias. And what they do is they form a thick turf wall lining the gastrointestinal tract. And as we touched on yesterday, that bacteria is responsible for the final breakdown. Hasn't the breakdown already happened? It has, under all of these enzymes. But when I say the final breakdown, one of the main things that's produced is your vitamin B. And this bacteria is very similar to the breakdown of cabbage to make sauerkraut. And sauerkraut is high in B vitamins because of this bacterial activity. And a lot of people get confused about cultured food and fermented food. Cultured food is an excellent source of this healthy or friendly or good bacteria. But when that culturing process goes too long and alcohol's produced, there's fermentation. Don't have that one. And so a lot of people wipe out all cultured foods because they get it mixed up with the fermented foods. So it helps with the final breakdown, and then these bacteria are responsible for the absorption of the nutrients out of our gut and into the blood. These bacteria protect. They protect the blood against any harmful pathogens, and they nourish the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. And yesterday we looked at the fact that the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract are remade every 3 to 5 days. And they are nourished by this healthy flora here. Now let me give you a couple of scenarios. Let's say someone's eating all day long, stressed with their meals, drinking with their meals, their hydrochloric acid will be low. And so that'll interfere with the breakdown of their protein. So here's protein. For an illustration, there's protein. Now the pepsin will break that protein down to peptides and polypeptides. So maybe the peptides and the polypeptides come down here, and the trypsin and the chymotrypsin, they break the peptides down to amino acids, and the polypeptides down to peptides and amino acids, and then amino acids. That's how it happens. But what if they're drinking with their meals, eating all day long, stressed out? Sometimes protein gets down to the duodenum. And the pancreas says, "What are you doing here?" And protein says, "Sorry, but there wasn't enough hydrochloric acid. There wasn't enough pepsin to break us down." Pancreas says, "I'll do what I can, but maybe it can only break down to a peptide and a polypeptide." And so it can't be absorbed because it can only be absorbed as amino acids. So it eventually comes into the large intestine, and the large intestine says, "What are you doing here?" And protein says, "Sorry, but they were drinking with their meals and they were eating all day long and they were stressed and stomach couldn't do it and pancreas did the best they could." And the colon has to create a lot of bacteria to try and break this down somewhat, and that causes methane gas. You've heard of that? Wind, lots of wind. Often that can happen when people have low hydrochloric acid. Can you see the effect all the way down? But also, as I mentioned earlier, hydrochloric acid is antifungal. It's antibacterial. But if hydrochloric acid's low, and the person that made the sandwich after they'd patted the dog and some nasty pathogens get into the sandwich, and hydrochloric acid is low so it can't deal with it, so it continues down. But God's got another defense system there, and that is this bacteria that's lining the gut. But if that person's taking antibiotics, antibiotics kill the good and the bad. Statin drugs, they can break it down. Long-term painkillers can break it down. Refined sugar, alcohol. Now, what have we done now? We've compromised the final breakdown, we've compromised the absorption, we've compromised protection. And so those bacteria can get into the blood, the pathogenic ones, from patting the dog and making the sound. And they should not ever be in the blood. So what happens now is the white blood cells have to come along and try and tackle that. So what happens up here affects all the way down the gastrointestinal tract. How can we rebuild if we've lost the bacteria? Well, in Australia, and what I'm about to tell you is true, I found it hard to believe because I was watching a show on the gut, and they showed that if someone has a compromised gut, then medicine does offer to do a fecal transplant. Have you heard of this? They take the feces from someone with a healthy gut, and I was watching the show, and what I tell you is true, they had a blender, and they put it in the blender with some water. I'm sure they don't do anything else with that blender. And they put it into a huge syringe about this big, put them under general anaesthetic, and yes, insert that healthy so-called feces into the colon of someone else. I think it costs about $10,000, but there's a much simpler way. Yes, a much simpler way. A man rang me up and he said, my 15-year-old daughter, we've already paid the $10,000 and she had it and she went all right for a while, but then she got a cold and took some antibiotics and now she's back to square one. Oof. He said, can you help her? I said, I believe we can, but is she willing to be helped? He went quiet. We cannot help someone if they're not willing to be helped. No, he said she likes her coffee and her sugar and her chocolates, and well, I'm sorry about that. So how can you do it naturally? Well, you can have those naturally cultured foods like your sauerkraut, your miso, your sourdough breads, your yogurts. I was in Alabama 2 weeks ago and I had the most beautiful almond milk yogurt. I don't know shops very well in the US, but search that one out because those cultured foods are very good at helping to replace this bacteria and of course stop taking anything in that will harm it. So most of the food is absorbed halfway down. So what's coming out here is liquid, and there's another double-layered valve there because we don't want anything here going up into there. And here is the appendix. God didn't make a mistake. God never makes mistakes. The appendix is not a useless organ. The appendix has two very important roles in the colon. It's called the colon's oil can because it lubricates the contents to go through with ease, and it also releases antibacterial fluid. Because for some people, what's coming out of here can be quite toxic. Why would it be quite toxic? Well, when vegetables, plant foods break down in the gut, they ferment. But when animal protein breaks down in the gut, it putrefies. And the fumes from putrefaction process is toxic. So let's say they're eating a lot of meat and they're drinking a lot of alcohol, which some do. What's coming out of here is quite toxic. So a friend of my husband who's living in Africa, he just got remarried, and he was sending photos of him having rich food and wine and steaks. Well, he ended up in hospital with a burst appendix. Now that can be deadly. I think his poor appendix was just getting overworked. It had to release so much antibacterial fluid because of what was coming out of here was quite toxic. A lady said to me, I just had my right ovary removed And the doctor said, I took your appendix while I was there, just in case. No. We shouldn't be cutting out body parts. Now, when I say that, I do acknowledge that there may be a time when a body part might need to be taken out. Like the girl that rang me and said, Barbara, the fibroid in my uterus is so big it's blocking off my colon. What should I do? I said, take it, have it cut out. Because if your colon can't work, you're going to die. So there might be a time. But I have other people who've come to me with fibroids, and we've been able to, little by little, take them away. But if it's blocking up a body part, there might be a time when surgery may be necessary. But ideally, you prevent that at all possible. So now we're in the large colon, large intestine, which is the colon. And the main function of the large colon is to take water out so stools are formed. So coming out here, it's quite liquid. And remember, it's here too where your B12 is absorbed. So by the time it gets through, the contents get through, it's started to take form. Now, if someone's dehydrated, more water can be taken out than should be taken out. So it's important to be well hydrated, and that would be at least 8 glasses of water a day. The colon also needs to be swept every day, and plant foods do that with their high fibre. What plant foods do is they sweep. See all these little corners? They need to be swept, and they're nicely swept by the fibre in plants. But what that fibre does is it stimulates peristalsis. Dr. Kellogg, very famous doctor from the mid-1800s who wrote many books on health, he said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. 2 intakes of food a day should equal 2 evacuations a day. But what happens, and I'm going to give you a visual on this, we should promptly answer nature's immediate call. And many people don't. And we are very glad for this loop at the end, because this loop at the end means if we've got to go and we just can't because the plane's about to land or whatever, it can be held. But if you have a feeling to go and you don't go, it'll all go back into the last part of the large intestine. And I'm sure everyone has experienced, they've got to go, they can't go, and then they go and they can't go. Because it's actually gone back, because it can't stay there. It's too much pressure. Many people use that because they're on the phone and it's an interesting phone call and they don't want to go. A lady said to me, if I feel to go, and she said, people pay $300 now to speak to me. I say, excuse me, but a crisis has arisen. I'll call you back. We should go. And unfortunately, many people don't see it as important. But if you get into the habit of not going when your body says to go, you weaken this whole area. And unfortunately, when pressure rises up there, horrible little things can pop out like this called hemorrhoids. And they're so horrible that I'm just going to rub them out again because we don't want to be reminded of them. So I've had people say to me, but Barbara, I drink all my water, I'm on a plant-based diet, I exercise every day because exercise massages the colon, and I still don't go every day. Well, what happens is the body can get into a habit, and so we need to break that habit. And there are a few things that one can do, and one very effective way is getting 4 teaspoons of chia seed in a cup of water, shaking it in a jar till it goes like a gel, and drink that whole glass of water. And that's a lovely, gentle way to encourage peristalsis to go through. Now you'll notice right at the end here there is a red loop, and that is a muscle called puborectalis. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to draw the throne. Here's the throne. And here's the person sitting doing their daily evacuation. When a person sits, puborectalis holds up that last section. But if the person sitting on the throne has a little stool in front of the throne, so that when they sit on the throne, the legs are up and those legs might be a bit long, and they are mimicking the squatting position, puborectalis relaxes. And when puborectalis relaxes, that last part of the colon opens right up and the contents passes with much greater ease. Now you can go to Bed Bath Beyond and buy a squatty potty, and that's a stool that sits around the toilet. Now I have travelled extensively, and when I was in Singapore, when I was in Africa, when I was in India, I saw the same thing. The toilet was a hole in the floor. It was all tiled, it was all clean and flush, but it was a hole in the floor. Traditionally, people have always squatted to do their daily evacuation, and now science shows that when a person squats, puborectalis relaxes and the contents is passed with ease. And so position is very important. So to help with constipation, try the chia seed, try squatting, exercise every day. Make sure you're having adequate water. But what if it's the other way? What if the person's going 10 times a day? Then we need to have some herbs that'll slow things down. And there's an excellent herb. It's an American herb. It's from the slippery elm tree. It's the bark. It's called slippery elm. And slippery elm coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gut. Let me tell you a story of a man who came to our retreat. He came with his wife. They were in their late 60s. I said, "Why are you coming to our retreat?" He said, "I'm coming to support my wife." He said, "That's the only reason I'm here. She paid the full amount, so I'm here." In other words, he didn't really want to be at our retreat. They were both retired, late 60s. So as I asked him questions, I discovered that he had irritable bowel syndrome. And he was on cortisone, he was on anti-inflammatory medication. He said, "I go 4 times before breakfast every day." He said, "I walk along the beach and I know where all the toilets are." Because every 15 minutes I have to visit, and then I go another couple of times through the day. That's 6 times a day, that's on medication. I said, "What do you have for breakfast?" He said, "For breakfast I have, and I'll write down the known allergens," and he was having them all. Wheat. We'll be looking at this in another lecture, but it was hybridized in the 50s, so it has a structure that's difficult to digest. Oats. For some people, oats go well. For some people, they don't. Dairy. These can be very irritating to an inflamed bowel. Peanuts and refined sugar. To add to this list of irritants, he was also having caffeine. I think he had about 5 coffees a day. And every night he had a scotch, so alcohol. He had no idea that these were irritating his gut. So at breakfast he had toast with butter, jam and a cup of coffee. Mid-morning, cup of coffee with cookie and made out of wheat and sugar. Always had dairy and sugar in his coffee. Lunchtime he had a white bread sandwich with ham and cheese. Afternoon, more cookies. At night he'd have meat and ice cream, all the things that irritate. I said, "Are you willing to try something?" He said, "I am, because my doctor has just told me he can do no more for me. In fact," he said, "if it continues, they're going to start cutting my colon out." So we gave him slippery elm 4 times a day. So about 8 o'clock, middle of the day, 6 o'clock and just before bed. And first 2 days are juicing days. I wondered how he'd go. But everything slowed down a little bit. In fact, his gut was so happy because it was getting a rest. So on Wednesday, when our guest started eating, he said to me, he said, I'm pretty impressed. He said, I've got no more cramping. He said, I'm not bleeding anymore from the colon. So even on that medication, he was bleeding nearly every stool. He said, I'm impressed. Remember, he didn't really want to be at our health retreat, but he was starting to get excited. By Thursday, he said, I've got no pain. He said, my bowel movements are taking form. He said, I only went 4 times yesterday now. And he said, I always go 6 times a day. So he's starting to become interested. I said, do you know what I would do if I was you? I said, it's your choice because I have no authority over your medication. But I said, I'd stop the anti-inflammatories. Because this tells me your colon is not as inflamed now. He said, okay, because I said, if it gets inflamed, you just go back on them. Or you can double the slippery elm, have 8 times the slippery elm. I said, this is a good opportunity to try it. He stopped and there was no reaction. In fact, on Sunday morning, just before breakfast, he came running up to me so excited. He said, once. I've gone once. He said, yes, we're talking about things we don't usually talk about. He was a very excited man. Do I have to tell him to stop all that? He experienced something that he never thought was possible. He said, what do I do now? I said, well, if you continue eating the way you've learned here and continue taking that slippery elm, I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 2 months you can start easing off your prednisone. You have to go slow with that one. That's one you cannot stop straight away. I said, just start easing off that little by little by little. What an incredible body we live in, with an inbuilt ability to heal itself when you give it the right conditions. What do you do for hemorrhoids? For hemorrhoids, please invest in a little stool or the squatty potty because it takes all the pressure off the anus. And I'll make sure that the colon is working regularly so there's no pressure there. And you can insert suppositories. And one suppository is getting a cotton ball, moistening it with castor oil and shaping it into the shape of your little finger and freezing it. It will take 3 days to freeze. But when it's frozen, then that can be inserted just before you go to bed at night. And that castor oil will melt and soothe and start to heal. The other suppository you can make is aloe vera. So you get the skin off an aloe vera plant and cut it into strips about the size of the little finger. It'll only take about 5 hours to freeze. So the person might do aloe vera one night, slippery elm, no, not slippery elm comes by the mouth. Castor oil the other night, so you can alternate the castor oil and the aloe vera suppositories. And we have found people have been helped very much by those. And so ends our journey through the gastrointestinal tract. I trust you've enjoyed the journey, and I trust your eyes have been open to a little bit more about the body that you live in. We're going to have a break now. It's 7:05. So please come back at 7:15. That's a 10-minute break, and we're going to look at fantastic fats.